So I wanted to go over some quick vocab before we start our graphing. And the first one is period, which is one cycle of a graph. And for cosecant and secant is just 2 pi. Amplitude is the distance from sinusoidal axis to top or bottom. And within the equation, we have our A, B, H, and K. A is our vertical stretch or compression. B is the horizontal stretch or compression. H is a horizontal translation, so that's left or right. And K is our vertical translations, up and down. And a quick note is for secant graphs, you graph cosine first. And for cosecant, you would graph the sine. Okay, so our first step, as for any graph, is to find our A, B, H, and K values. So the standard equation is y equals A, and then secant, and then B, x minus H, plus K. And the graph that we're going to do today is y equals 3 secant 3x minus pi over 2 plus 2. And so first we're going to find our A value. And that's easy. That's just right in front of the secant. So our A value is 3. Then for B value, we have to factor it out. So we can factor out 3. So we have 3, and then x minus, and then when you divide, you would multiply by 1/3. So it would be pi over 6. So our B value is 3. And then our H value, we already factored out in this, so our H value is pi over 6. And last of all is our K value, which is at the very end. And our K value is 2. Next, we're going to get the amplitude and the period of this function. So the amplitude is the absolute value of A. In that case, it's 3. So the absolute value of 3, which is just 3. And for the period, for secant, it's just 2 pi. So it'd be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. And our B value is 3. So that's the absolute value of 3. And that's just 2 pi over 3. And when we graph this, we'll be graphing a cosine function. And it's going to have the same period as this because there's no difference, just 2 pi. And now we're going to find the tick marked width. And all you have to do is take the period and divide that by 4. So we're going to take 2 pi over 3, divide that by 4. And so you would just do 2 pi over 3 times 1/4. And that's 2 pi over 12. And then you can simplify that to pi over 6. And this is our tick mark. Now we're going to label our graph. So we have our x and y axis. And then we always label our k. So that's 2. And that's our sinusoidal axis. And we get our amplitude, and that's 3 above, so that's 5. And 3 below, that's -1. Okay, now we're going to label our tick marks. And first, we always label our period. So we're going to do 2 full periods. So one period is right here. And that's 2 pi over 3. And then multiply that by 2, and that's 4 pi over 3. And now we just have to fill in the marks in between. So our tick mark width was pi over 6, and that's the easiest value to start off with. So we'll start off with that one. And pi over 6 plus pi over 6 is 2 pi over 6, and that simplifies to pi over 3. And then you add it again, and you have 3 pi over 6, which simplifies to pi over 2. Then you have 2 pi over 3, and then 5 pi over 6. And then you add again, and you have 6 pi over 6, and that simplifies to pi. And then you add again, and you have 7 pi over 6. And now you have your tick marks. Okay, so now we're actually going to start plotting and labeling and graphing our points. So we're going to do a cosine function first, because in order to get the secant graph, you have to graph the cosine. So we start off with a horizontal shift, which is pi over 6, and we label that where k is. Now, if you're wondering if we're increasing or decreasing, if we're going to go down, know that a cosine function alternates from decreasing to increasing. So we're going to be going down, and we'll plot right here at -1. And then we go back up, and then we go all the way up here at 5, which is the highest value. Then we go back down to our sinusoidal axis, and then back down to -1, then back up to the axis, and then back up to 5. And now I'm just going to connect those points. Okay, now we're gonna put in or graph in our asymptotes, and asymptotes occur at the zeros of our cosine function, or where it is on the sinusoidal axis. So we have it at pi over 6, and then again at pi over 2, then 5 pi over 6, and at 7 pi over 6. Okay, so now we're at our final step, and we can actually graph the secant function. So now you go to the minimums and the maximums, and you simply draw the curve. So if it's a minimum, it goes down. If it's a maximum, it goes up. So we have one at pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, and 4 pi over 3. And basically, all you have to do when you're graphing these is you graph this cosine, and then you graph the reciprocal, which is this. And that's our graph.